Hello and welcome back. We now start the final panel discussion of the day and also the week, the final session of Environmental Packaging Week. So we're going to be asking and talking. We're going to be asking in this session, looking at is there more emphasis on eco-friendly packaging in the e-commerce market, and we're going to be talking many things, and possibly overlapping a little bit with what we've been talking about in the previous session, and perhaps even earlier in the week as well. And just to say thank you very much to Carlton Packaging, who are sponsoring this session. And so I'm delighted to welcome our panel. On our panel is Amelia Dales, who is Commercial Director at Garcon Wines, Alan Magee, Senior Packaging Consultant at Carlton Packaging, and Sujan Shah, who is Chief Executive at, and apologies if I pronounce this wrong, is it Robaca Packaging? Is that correct, or Robaca Packaging?
Robaca Packaging.
Robaca. Okay, thank you very much, and thank you all for joining us. So the next 40 minutes or so, we'll have a talk about an area that's been growing a lot, of course, over the last few years, and there's been a huge sort of explosion in e-commerce, but perhaps particularly so right now because of the e-commerce, because of the COVID-19 pandemic. More people at home, more people now ordering online, whether it's their groceries or whether it's just goods through places like Amazon and that sort of thing. It seems like there's a potential that this sort of market has really kicked on over the last few months. So really, it's good to have sort of design manufacturers in on this, because what I really first question really is to ask you, and if I can ask Alan this question first, is has COVID-19 pandemic placed more packaging suppliers under pressure as more people are ordering online? Is it fair to say that this has been an incredibly tight turnaround in some cases?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, well, I appreciate the last week, really. So first of all, to start by thanking Packaging News for kind of laying this on and pulling it all together. It's been really fantastic. So I'm sure I speak for everyone that's been listening over the past few days. But I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's how you kind of determine the word pressure. Certainly, there's been more demand for packaging, and of course, like you say, with everyone at home ordering online, perhaps ordering non-essential goods online rather than going to the stores, the demand for packaging has increased dramatically, which of course, yes, that does in turn put pressure on supply chains who may have been built for a certain capacity and suddenly are asking for 25, 30, 40% more capacity to put into that same supply chain and to turn things round in the same kind of timescales. So yeah, as designers ourselves, we're constantly working with clients to understand what the demand and what the needs are. And I guess through that period of demand, the key is to put everything we can into it to ensure that clients can receive the goods when they need them, so that consumers in turn can receive their items. But I guess the other question it raises is that as more online demand comes through, as the pressure builds within these online operations to fulfill orders, it's balancing that with the sustainable agenda. Does that drop down the list because actually the pressure is getting goods out the door?
Thank you very much, Amelia. If I can come to you, I mean, how has this sort of pandemic affected your business?
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you, Philip. Really great to be here this morning. Thank you. It's an interesting one, actually. So to give a little bit of a background on what we do at Garcon Wines, we're the inventors and creators of eco-flat wine bottles, which is why I've got a closed bottle of wine on my desk with me this morning, just to show what we do. And one of the problems that we were trying to solve when we were looking at our packaging formats, we're a packaging company that offers sustainable solutions for the wine industry specifically. But one of the issues that we were trying to solve was the complications that arise through the dominant packaging format, which is glass bottles, and the complications that are present for e-commerce in wine. And wine is typically always lagged behind in terms of market share for sales of wine online. And it's been something that is, kind of been held back a little bit by the packaging, because you've got a lot of chances of broken glass, also weight to contend with, and all of these things. So we actually created a bottle that's made of 100% recycled PET. And is flat, so we're saving a lot of space and also removing that breakability element. And to come back to your question specifically about how the impact that it's had on our business this year, it's been really positive, because, as I say, trends have really started to shift, and purchasing behaviours have changed because of the pandemic, and because of, it's been really tragic for the on-trade having to close a lot of the time for this year. And so consumers have been looking to new platforms to access wine. So not just in the typical kind of in-store grocery channels, but obviously e-commerce has become a big part of that. And one element of what we offer with our bottle is letterbox wine. And that means that it's a single bottle of wine that can be posted through a UK letterbox. And that particular part of our business has seen a huge demand this year, increase with all of our stockists that offer our wine bottles for gifting. Because essentially what we're offering is a way to not just order wine online, but do it in a way that can be delivered safely and seamlessly into a UK home, playing into the new need for contactless delivery and safe delivery of products. But all of that comes back to, I guess, ensuring that what we're doing from a packaging perspective is fit for purpose for e-com. And to take on Alan's point as well, that question around does then sustainability and eco-friendliness potentially be impacted, and what we do is hopefully offer a solution that means you can have fit for purpose packaging that also balances those elements as well to achieve sustainability rather than just pure eco-friendliness.
Thank you, Amelia. And just over to you, Sujan. How has business been for you during this pandemic, and has it accelerated demand in e-commerce?
Yes, thanks, Phil. So there was a period, I think, for a lot of businesses when the first lockdown kicked in March, where we thought, where is business going to go? Right? Are we even going to survive through this period in the next 6 months? And what actually transpired through the following months was a growth for one of our main brands in Carrier Bag Shop in sales into the takeaway market, particularly, which sometimes gets looked aside as not really e-commerce, but people jumping on Deliveroo and Just Eat, etc. It's still an e-commerce style transaction. So it was the takeaway and food market that particularly grew and has seen incredible growth throughout this entire period. When I look at it, though, from an environmental point of view, these takeaways and restaurants are not able to deliver food in plastic bags, for example, yet it's okay to put 6 or 8 plastic containers inside a paper bag and deliver it to us, where we had drawers full of plastic carrier bags that we'd pick up from the supermarket. I think people are building up loads of food containers now. And the other side of it was a lot of the bespoke packaging work we do for clients. They wanted to replicate the in-store experience into an online environment, and quite often that has to be experiential. So you're talking about more elaborate packaging. I could give you an example of a hotel that we work with that wanted to build packaging for afternoon tea, which they sell for over £100. The packaging for that to essentially deliver sandwiches and scones was really, really elaborate and not environmentally friendly at all. Which is why I think what Amelia is doing with Garcon is bringing an experiential experience of wine through the post, but also thinking about the environment as well. I haven't seen a growth in people thinking about the environment during this period, but definitely an increase in demand for sure.
Thank you very much, and I'm really pleased that almost immediately we have had questions coming in. So there are plenty of people out there sort of keen and engaged with this particular topic, and it actually kind of merges into a question that I wanted to ask as well. I mean, this question says, is there any reason why we won't see the same online and newspaper picture stories this Christmas about small items being delivered in a massive packaging, which I think when we talk about sustainability in this particular area is kind of the almost go-to sort of area topic, if you like. And my sort of follow up to that is that that's all very well and good, but it's in some ways is it kind of unfair to sort of blame packaging designers, manufacturers for that kind of oversized or over packaging. And I'm also interested to find out from you guys, how's that happened in the first place and what can be done to stop it in the future. A lot of things to digest there. But Alan, if I can come to you first on that, I mean, it is a fair question. We're probably going to see Christmas with a lot of Instagram pictures of people being cross about their packaging, but that doesn't immediately strike me that that's necessarily packaging industry's fault. Am I right there?
It's an interesting question, and I'm sure we'll see pictures of toothbrushes in huge boxes, lipsticks in the big, but we're going to see this, and it's always the questions that get asked: how has this happened? I don't think it's strictly unfair to blame the packaging industry, because I think it's the responsibility, and I think we had it in an earlier debate, of companies like ourselves, packaging designers, creators, to work with the brands and the end users to not only understand the packaging, but the whole process and the way it's used. So there's a lot more to the online fulfillment story than just the cardboard box at the end, if that's what it is, to put the product in. It goes through a whole process of being located and picked and stored and then brought to a pack area, packed and distributed. That's a very long process, or can be a long process. And there's quite a few steps in that process. So as a company, I mean, we have kind of three strands. We have developing smarter products for our clients, but in conjunction with developing a smarter process of the way that's being used. So it's kind of, well, is it the right product? Is it being used in the right way? What is your process? How do you do this? Because, for example, if you've got an online retailer that's distributing a huge range of different products, their processes may not allow them to have the right size piece of packaging every time. But actually, if we can tweak some processes and if we can develop some smart packaging solutions, so there might be things like we've developed boxes and bags, sustainable solutions that can be adjusted very easily with some additional tabs. But I think the key point from our perspective is that often this has happened when clients, and you come back to how has it happened? How have we got to that position? Well, often it's probably when online retailers add more and more products to the offering, and potentially we could see this grow during the lockdown pandemic, where we've got non-essential retailers moving a lot more to online. So there's a lot more products being moved across to online. So I can now go onto my favorite retailer, I can order the products that I need to order. They've been added to the range over the last few months. There hasn't been the time to develop the specific packaging pieces to those items. Having said that, I say, as a packaging provider, it is my job to work with my clients and for retailers out there so that we don't have the toothbrushes in the huge boxes and the lipsticks in the massive boxes with lots of paper void fill, etc.
Thank you, Alan. Amelia, if I can come to you, and maybe it's not quite such a maybe it's a slightly different issue for Garcon, but is that something that is still a sort of major issue overall? And I'm guessing from your perspective, would it be fair to say that design can perhaps help alleviate the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Alan's points actually were really interesting, and congratulations for accepting a little bit of responsibility and not trying to shift blame here, because I think that attitude that we maybe have had previously and historically of moving blame and who's at fault and whose responsibility is it's just not going to work going forward, because ultimately all of this plays into the fact that we're living in a planet together as humans, not as businesses or corporates or organizations, but as humans that have a responsibility to Mother Earth. And that means, doing what we can where we can as individuals or as businesses. And I think what's really interesting, this idea around the delivery of, very small items in huge boxes is bananas. But what's quite interesting, I think, with the pandemic that's amplified this, and hopefully raises more awareness and then leads to change, is that we're all, or we have been a lot of the time, in our own homes, and all of the packaging and the various different items, from food to consumer goods, they're all there in your home, in your bin, and you're so much more aware of it. I've at least noticed this very much so. You're so much more aware of the It was interesting actually in the panel discussion before, somebody mentioned not to talk about waste, and I agree. It's we call it waste, but it can be reused, it can be recycled. So I'll use the term waste for want of a better word at this point. But yeah, we have a responsibility, and I think there's been a light kind of shone on it in our own homes, in our own experiences of how we engage with products and how we engage with packaging. And absolutely, I think packaging designers have a responsibility to take a holistic view, as Alan says, to take a look at how products are being used and what methods or routes they're going to take to actually get into the consumer and into consumer homes. And actually really interesting that Alan mentions void fill, because that's something that's super relevant to what we do at Garcon as well, and really important, because the impact of void fill is something that we really need to address and to take into consideration. This happens in the wine industry. As an example from where we're coming from at Garcon Wines, where round glass bottles are used and shipped in containers right around the world, but there's such a huge amount of empty space been moved because everything's not been, I suppose, space and efficiencies for pallet configurations, things have not been used efficiently. But that translates all the way through the supply chain, especially as we see this rise in acceleration, sharp rise in acceleration in e-commerce over this year, because supply chains are getting increasingly more complex and need to be efficient in order to remain eco-friendly, if you want to call it that, but truly it's sustainable, so that they have this triple bottom line sustainability that we believe in, which is not just one piece, which is the eco-friendly, but also we have to also consider very much the planet, but also consideration to people and consumers and their reactions and happiness, and then also profit for businesses, because ultimately it needs to make sense financially. You have to balance the financials with the environmental as well.
Thank you very much. And on this point, if I could come to you, Sujan, on what sounds to me in some cases is perhaps there's a lack of collaboration in some areas, and there needs to be sometimes more joined up thinking when we're on these in these kind of projects.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. I think both Alan and Amelia made really good points there, from the consumer at one end all the way through to the manufacturers. Taking the consumer, for example, it's very easy to go onto an online retailer, buy something with free next day shipping, and then 2 hours later for me to think, oh, I forgot to order that as well, place a second order. Unbeknown to me, my wife might place an order as well. And the next thing you know, we've got a driver turning up with 3 boxes, which could easily have fitted into one box, for example. And for the retailers in the middle there, their focus seems to be around the efficiency of how can we pick, pack and ship orders as quickly as possible, not necessarily how can we pick, pack and ship orders in an as environmentally friendly way as possible. So the responsibility, where the responsibility in the chain lies, is an interesting question. We have an office and distribution center in Germany, and Germany have a very different approach. At the beginning of last year in 2019, the packaging tax was introduced into Germany, where all organizations are responsible for reporting to the government how much packaging they're putting into the system, whether it's paper, plastic, bottles, or what have you. And you have to pay a levy based on that. So in that instance, it's in your interest to package things in fewer boxes or fewer bottles or what have you, because you have to pay less tax. I think introducing something where there is a responsibility on manufacturers, retailers to use less packaging is potentially a way that we could incentivize a bit more of a thought around environmental processes in that.
It's interesting you use the word incentivize there as well, and often the word I've heard used is nudging industry and that sort of thing. And Alan, if I can come to you, do you feel that that's something that, I mean, we talked about it in the previous panel as well, about government legislation and how that's going to have an impact. Obviously, that a lot of what people are talking about when they think packaging, they're thinking about FMCG, they're thinking about supermarket, but also the impact is also on e-commerce, is it not? And a kind of, is there that overall drive, the pressure that legislation will have on the industry is going to affect e-commerce packaging as well?
I'm sure it certainly will, and I'm sure legislation that comes through will definitely have that impact on online, because a lot of retailers are understanding that a huge proportion of their packaging is actually the online piece. So from that perspective, legislation is bound to have some impact. I think the other thing that we have to bear in mind is that as we add more materials and give more choice for the packer at that point of packaging, that added complexity could have, if we're not careful, could have the effect of delaying the process. So if we have a packer that's packing an online order, the more choice or the more complex we make that packaging process, if we're not very careful and if we don't have the right designs and the right controls and the right processes, there is the possibility that is slowed down. So therefore, made an excellent point. I'm going on now and I'm expecting my order, if not today, well, at least first thing tomorrow morning, placing my order. Well, actually, if I'm expecting that, am I prepared for that to be impacted so that my item can arrive in the perfect size box? Now, I'm sure these are all balances, and I'm not saying you can't have one and the other, but it's each retailer taking that whole process and working closely with a design-led packaging partner. And I think that's the key, and that's kind of where we've seen a huge amount of growth in our business. We're a design-led business, so that means working with brands that understand the intricate detail of their processes and what their consumer wants, and then it's our job to come up with a design which completely fulfills that.
Thanks, Alan. Amelia, if I can pick up on something there that Alan said about design. Design feels sometimes in this whole debate, not just in e-commerce, but across the board, that sometimes design feels like it's been left out a little bit, if you like, that we're perhaps not thinking in that way. It's an industry sometimes that's been accused of working in silos. So you have your designers, you have your manufacturers, you have your end-of-life sort of waste management companies. Everybody's in silos. Is that something that really needs to change on this as well?
Yes, frankly, yeah, I think it does. It's interesting that you highlight these silos because there's so much that we can learn from having more of a, I guess, open and collaborative approach to understanding design through the various packaging designs, through the various different stages, as you say, from manufacture through to what the consumer requirement is. I think, typically the packaging industry has, well, actually, it's unfair. It's come a very long way, and we've been doing some really great work, I think, in the last few years, especially to really shine a light on sustainability and make changes and look at innovation in materials and design. But the basic key elements have always been for packaging. The purpose is to protect the contents and to be price suitable. And I don't think that's. I think they're need to haves, but I think that pool of need to haves is expanding now. So there needs to be more focus on innovation and more focus on redesign and improvement. Because if we continue to just look at the absolutely basic elements, it will put us at a disadvantage as companies if we don't continue to innovate, because those, I think, the world that we're in today and the next generation and future generations that are coming through, there's so much more focus on asking questions and wanting to understand more, and really great. You see all these young activists out and doing school strikes, and these are really gives me hope, I think, for the future, because they're wanting to better understand and they're more informed. Which means that packaging companies that want to, stay ahead, stay relevant, and succeed need to take into account, maybe rethinking what has always been done. And that's what we did with the wine bottle and innovating from the status quo. And sustainability is going to be a key part of that. It's going to become one of the need to haves rather than the nice to haves.
And Sujan, if I can just sort of bring your sort of views on this and talk about design, but also a bit about sort of innovation as well, because I sometimes get the impression it is e-commerce can be sometimes quite a difficult area to innovate in sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure for a lot of businesses it can be. When you bring design into the conversation with packaging, for us, we like to think about experiences and the experiences of the end user when they receive a product, whether it's with a courier or through the post. We can't create the same experiences that we can in store. That little endorphin hit when you tap your card and you've purchased something, that now comes from when you open a box and it arrives through the box, through the left with the courier or what have you. So we're thinking about building experiences through the packaging. And so if we want to use the packaging to be able to do that from an environmental perspective, perhaps telling the story about how the packaging that you're using is environmentally friendly will allow you to build these experiences which can increase kind of brand loyalty and what have you. So the design element can lead to really good customer experiences and then build brand loyalty in that way.
Thank you. Just to sort of bring in a question that's come in, which talks a bit about carbon. So, question is: does the increased demand for e-commerce not cause more problems with emissions due to increased transportation? And is the industry addressing this? And I think there might be a wider view as well, in that sometimes when we're talking about this market, and all markets as well, we concentrate so much on the packaging, we perhaps forget sometimes of the overall impact on the environment, and that includes also the product as well, and taking that into consideration, that perhaps packaging is a small, albeit significant part of the supply chain. Alan, if I can come to you, how does carbon sort of affect your design and how you approach a project?
That's a really interesting question, and it's certainly significant. As we know, some materials, when we talk about sustainability, we're often thinking about the end of life. So what do we do with that material once the consumer's arrived home, they've collected their parcel, they've brought it home, or had it delivered, they've opened that, and then what do they do with the packaging? That's one element. But then from our perspective, it's what's it taken to create that in the first place? So we work closely with our clients to understand, right, if you're reviewing the whole packaging process, we must include that carbon footprint up front in terms of the manufacturing element of the whole piece. So as to say, really, maybe the end user, maybe the best way is a paper product. It's an easy, curbside recyclable, off it goes. But actually comparing up front in terms of the manufacturing impact of what's it taken to create that product in terms of energy and carbon footprint. But I guess the wider question that you've raised there is a good one. Well, actually, you've got these delivery drivers now driving around delivering the parcels. Is that more or less than me getting in my car and driving to the store? And I guess that's something that the courier providers can answer. But I guess there's a lot of scope here to create efficiencies in delivering. So in an ideal world, you've got one van who's delivering a whole street of product, rather than the individual consumers going out and sourcing from where they choose to. So it's a really interesting question.
Thank you very much, Alan. And Amelia, if I can come to you on that, it's something that we shouldn't lose sight of. We talk rightly about the packaging, and packaging's vital role in protecting the product, but we do have to think of the overall carbon footprint sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really important one, and I'm so pleased that was asked as a question, because it is something that I think maybe from a consumer perspective isn't immediately obvious. We as a company have been doing quite a bit of work in the Nordics with our bottles launching in supermarkets and the equivalent of supermarkets in the Nordic countries. And there's a lot of focus on LCAs. So there's a lot of focus on carbon footprints of different types of packaging, and communicating that actually to the consumer, so that it's not just it's not just a decision if you're buying a grocery product on the sugar level or the fat level, but also an impact of the product and the packaging from a carbon perspective. So really, really great to be considering that. I guess from a looking to the grocery industry or the food and beverage in general, Alan's point about looking to what the carbon footprint impact is of delivery for e-com is an interesting one, and definitely something that should be considered. I guess the important piece there is not just material selection and what the packaging is, but also successful first-time delivery. And it's something that, as I say, with our letterbox wine product is something that we really considered, because there is a cost, not just a financial cost, but an environmental cost of missed deliveries and unsuccessful first-time deliveries. And that is something that you can look at as an advantage of being able to get directly into consumer homes first time. And also, I think really interesting, this kind of cradle to grave analysis is going to be something that is not an easy one solution fits all. So in terms of a material choice or anything like that, and a delivery mechanism. But it is something that, again, we need to look at from a holistic point of view and not focus just on one element, but to really consider all the way through from cradle to grave what impacts are on various different parts of supply chain.
And Sujan, if I can just bring you in on that point about carbon and the importance again of having sort of an overall kind of picture, if you like, on what we design and what we create.
Yeah, definitely. I think both points that were made there were very interesting. If we talk about the carbon footprint of the manufacturer, the plastic versus paper debate will rage on whether or not paper is more efficient or not in the manufacturing process. But I think if we're shipping things with couriers and through the post, being as efficient as we can with space so that we don't end up shipping air is particularly important. I remember Uber released some data earlier this year, and there were certain cities where their cars were spending between 50 and 70% of their time driving around without passengers inside. The same can be applied to kind of couriers and that kind of thing. They're driving around without goods and without parcels and moving around air. So we do need to think if we can alleviate that problem through packaging design and being more efficient with the way that boxes can be kind of put together and stacked and stored as well.
Just to add to that point, actually, super interesting that the point that you make there, Sujan, because it is I think there's opportunity for sure for improved delivery mechanisms. So less focus maybe on the packaging industry as a whole, but as you say, we have these really great, I suppose almost. We have some systems in place that could be utilized much more efficiently. So not having empty vans driving around, not having empty Ubers driving around as well, and the improvement on delivery models is probably something that needs to be looked at as e-commerce continues to rise and to grow and to be successful. That's probably where the next kind of improvements can be made.
Thanks, Amelia. I'm trying to squeeze in one more question, and this is sort of, I think we touched on it a little bit earlier, but perhaps we can go into a little bit more detail, although we're a little bit pushed for time. Heard the question asked that there's kind of problems recycling and low recycling rates in some cases because of tape and other materials are attached to so much packaging in the e-commerce sector. What's your view on that? And it sort of comes back to a wider view about lots of materials being used in the process and a sort of material reduction. I mean, Alan, if I can come to you first, is that a big problem? I mean, tape is mentioned there, and is there any way we can get through that really and redesign packaging to reduce that?
Yes, a very good question. And I'll come back to kind of what we said earlier, that it's more important than ever, we believe, for the online retailers to be working with a design-led packaging provider. The days, we believe, of just churning out the standard packaging materials, buy a cardboard box, buy a roll of tape, put it together, ship it out, those days are gone. We need to be working very closely, collaborating together, both packaging designer, packaging provider, and retailer and consumer, so that the consumer experience is wow, whatever that might be for the brand. And that's very sustainable led. It's a very environmentally friendly led. And as a company, we've developed different products. You mentioned tape. Paper tape is the ideal solution to replace your standard sticky tape. And we've developed alternative solutions, paper tape led. We've now got a handheld paper tape applicator, the X Taper. And that's just one thing, we've been developing with clients. The key thing here is that it's design-led and it's development. We need to keep changing, keep developing, keep challenging everything. Every material, challenge it. Is it the best way? Is it the best solution? Does it provide the best sustainable solution? And I think we touched on it earlier, making sure that's communicated to the consumer. That's, for me, that's a number one. Does the consumer know exactly what to do with that piece of packaging once they've finish their use for it. There's ways to make that more attractive. You know, we've done some great work with clients over the months in, you know, having some really neat cardboard boxes with some cutouts on the side for the kids to enjoy, assembling some, you know, play toys out of the cardboard box, etc. You know, we get some creative ways, but ultimately, when the use is over, when my use is over for that product, is it absolutely clear to me as a consumer what I should be doing with it, what the best way to move that material on is. So I think start to finish, it's designing it with the end in mind, starting with the end in mind. What do I want to achieve? And then working with a design-led packaging provider to achieve that whole smooth process and communicating it.
Thank you. And Amelia, if I can come to you, and a good point actually Alan made there about communication to the consumer. When they get it, do they know how to separate it, to know what bin it goes into? And that strikes me as a sort of one of the major hurdles perhaps in terms of when you're dealing with multiple materials.
Absolutely, it's. I think communication is key. It's a key element that needs to be considered by packaging and design companies, because ultimately, communication about what to do with the product or a piece of packaging at the end of life will help to ensure the highest possible chance of either that product being recycled correctly or put in the correct bin or moved on to a reuse. Whatever it's going to be used for next, but that is really, really key. And also to consider material mixes as well, I think is important for from a packaging and design perspective, because there are, you know, certain materials that are recyclable and can be recyclable, but you start mixing these together and then you start to see issues. So we actually experienced this in the R&D when we were looking at first kind of designing our bottles and what to use. The industry standard for screw caps in the wine industry is an aluminium cap, and so we popped an aluminium cap on top of our bottle and then went to have a look from a design perspective and recyclability perspective what impacts that would have, and it actually turned out that it would then have a negative impact on the recyclability of the bottle. So the bottle would be recycled, but because that aluminium skirt stayed on there, it was a problem. So these things we have to look at and to consider and to continue to push ourselves to be better. So yeah, I agree very much with Alan's point, is that we have to really consider what is going to happen to that piece of packaging after it's been put into the market, after it's been used by the consumer.
Thank you, Amelia. And final word goes to you, Sujan. So yes, again, we talked about materials again here and mixing materials and making sure that there's communication. I mean, how important is it when selecting materials that you get that right, and that it's also easy for consumers to understand what you do with it after you've opened it?
Of course, yes. If you're mixing materials and making things no longer eco-friendly or not able to recycle them, that has a negative impact. I think organizations like ours that sell packaging need to take a little bit of responsibility in educating the brands and customers that we have, that a little bit more investment in better quality products that are more eco-friendly, taking paper tape as an example over PVC tape, can be a brand enhancer. So if you are buying better quality materials that make your packaging more recyclable, and you are telling your customers about it, then there's a brand opportunity here. So educating and encouraging businesses to use more eco-friendly products and then telling the story will mean that we'll be not so much mixing and matching materials to kind of alleviate this problem.
Thank you very much indeed. And so I'm afraid we're just about out of time for today's session and for I'm afraid for Environmental Packaging Week. A big thank you to all our panelists today. Big thank you to Amelia. Big thank you to Alan. Big thank you to Sujan. Thank you so much indeed for joining us. And I hope that thank you also to all of you who viewed Environmental Packaging Week. I hope you've learned something, and we at Packaging News look forward to putting on something similar next year. We're looking forward to your feedback and ideas on what subjects we should look at next year, what we can improve on, where we can work at things. So and it's fair to say though that sustainability is a subject that provokes a wide variety of opinions and viewpoints. So just to end with another thank you. Also, thank you very much to Carlton Packaging for sponsoring. Thank you to the team at Silverstream. Thank you to Emma, who's Emma and Hilary, who've helped manage this event, Tony Corbin for helping to put together the program. Big thank you also to Martin Kirsch, who chaired yesterday. So thank you for him to stepping in. Thank you to Wakas Qureshi and also Tony Corbin for helping us with getting the questions from the audiences over to me. So as I say, finally, I hope we can put this on live next year. And it's fair to say that these are very, very difficult times right now. So I hope that you can all look after yourselves, stay well, and I hope that we at Packaging News look forward to seeing you sometime very, very soon. But for now, from Environmental Packaging Week, it's goodbye.